Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving deep into something that'll make you question everything you think you know about survival. Picture this. No grocery stores, no restaurants, no delivery apps. Just you, the wilderness, and whatever nature decides to offer. But we're not talking about some weekend camping trip or survival reality show. We're going back. Way back. To a time when our ancestors faced challenges that would break most of us before breakfast. I'm talking about life 4.8 million years ago, when early humans didn't just survive on what we'd call impossible odds, they thrived. And if you think you've got what it takes to handle their daily reality, well, let me tell you right now, you probably don't. But that's exactly why we need to understand how they did it. Before we jump in, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments. There's something incredible about connecting with people all around the world through these stories of our shared past. And if you're enjoying this journey back in time, a quick like really helps the channel grow. Now settle in, maybe grab something to eat, because by the end of this, you're going to look at your dinner very differently. We're about to explore the survival diet that kept our species alive when everything in the world was trying to kill us. Congratulations, you've just woken up 4.8 million years ago in what we now call the East African Rift Valley. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, staying that way is going to require skills, instincts, and stomach strength you never knew you needed. Your world is nothing like the romanticized caveman stories you've seen in movies. This isn't some noble savage fantasy where muscular hunters bring home mammoth steaks every night. This is raw, desperate, moment-to-moment survival where your next meal isn't guaranteed, and your dietary choices are limited to whatever won't kill you first. The landscape around you is harsh and unforgiving. Rolling savannas stretch endlessly, broken by patches of dense woodland and rocky outcroppings. The climate is unpredictable. Seasons shift without warning. Rivers that flow one month disappear the next. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there are things that view you not as the apex predator you imagine yourself to be, but as a convenient snack. But here's what's fascinating. Our early human ancestors didn't just barely scrape by on this diet of desperation. They developed nutritional strategies so effective that they literally shaped our evolution. The foods they chose, the way they processed them, the timing of when they ate, all of this created the foundation for the human brain and body you have today. The first thing that would shock you about early human eating habits is how little they actually resembled eating at all. Forget sitting down to meals. Forget plates or utensils or even the concept of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Early humans were opportunistic feeders, which is a polite way of saying they ate whatever they could find, whenever they could find it, however they could get it down. Their day started before dawn, not because they set an alarm, but because the sounds of the African wilderness don't come with a snooze button. Lions roaring in the distance, hyenas whooping as they finish their nightly hunts, the rustling of who knows what in the nearby bushes. You woke up because staying asleep might mean never waking up again. And immediately, before your eyes were fully open, your mind was already working on the day's most critical question. What am I going to eat? And how am I going to get it without becoming something else's meal? The foundation of the early human diet wasn't meat, despite what every paleo diet enthusiast wants you to believe. It was plants. Lots and lots of plants. But not the kind you'd recognize from your local farmer's market. We're talking about tough, fibrous, often bitter vegetation that required serious commitment to consume. Wild tubers were a staple, but digging them up was backbreaking work. Using primitive digging sticks, early humans would spend hours excavating these underground treasures. And when they finally got them out of the ground, the tubers were often so tough and fibrous they couldn't be eaten raw. This is where our ancestors got creative in ways that would make modern survival experts weep with admiration. They learned to pound these tubers with rocks, breaking down the fibers and making them digestible. They discovered that certain clay deposits could be mixed with bitter plants to neutralize toxins. They figured out which roots could be chewed for hours to extract every possible calorie, and which ones would kill you if you made a mistake. Seeds and nuts formed another crucial part of their diet, but again, nothing was simple. Many of these required extensive processing. Nuts had to be cracked with precisely the right amount of force. Too little, and you couldn't get to the meat inside. Too much, and you'd destroy the precious calories you were trying to access. Seeds often needed to be ground between stones, a process that could take hours and left your hands raw and bleeding. But perhaps most challenging of all were the leaves and stems that early humans consumed. Modern humans can't properly digest most wild vegetation. Our stomachs aren't equipped for it, but our ancestors developed techniques that seem almost magical in their ingenuity. They learned which leaves needed to be crushed and mixed with water to break down tough cellulose. They discovered that certain plants became more nutritious when exposed to specific temperatures or moisture levels. They figured out complex preparation methods that could turn poisonous plants into life-sustaining food. And all of this plant processing wasn't just about getting calories. It was about getting the specific nutrients that their developing brains and bodies required. The mineral content in wild tubers, the essential fatty acids in certain seeds, the vitamins hidden in tough, bitter leaves. Every choice was a matter of survival. But plants alone weren't enough to fuel the remarkable evolutionary leap that early humans were making. They needed protein, and getting it meant entering into a deadly game with some of the most dangerous predators on Earth. Early humans weren't hunters in the way we think of hunting today. They were scavengers, opportunists, and occasionally very reluctant predators. The image of brave cavemen taking down massive beasts with primitive spears is mostly Hollywood fantasy. The reality was far more desperate and infinitely more dangerous. Scavenging was an art form that required incredible courage, timing, and knowledge. When lions or leopards made a kill, early humans had to calculate whether they could steal enough meat to make the risk worthwhile. This meant approaching active predator sites, often while the original killers were still in the area. The strategy was usually to wait. Wait until the main predators had eaten their fill and moved away from the carcass, but not too long, because hyenas, vultures, and other scavengers would strip a carcass clean within hours. The timing had to be perfect, and the execution had to be swift. When they finally approached a carcass, early humans couldn't be picky. They took whatever they could get. Bone marrow was a prized resource, rich in fats and nutrients that plant foods couldn't provide. But extracting marrow meant cracking open bones with rocks, a noisy process that could attract unwanted attention from miles away. Sometimes they got lucky and found eggs, bird eggs, reptile eggs, any eggs they could reach without getting killed by protective parents. These were nutritional goldmines, packed with protein and fats in convenient portable packages. But reaching them often meant climbing trees, navigating cliff faces, or outsmarting creatures with sharp beaks and powerful talons. Insects formed a surprisingly large part of their protein intake. Termites, ants, beetle larvae, grasshoppers. Modern humans turn their noses up at bug protein, but our ancestors knew these tiny creatures were nutritional powerhouses, rich in protein, healthy fats, and essential minerals. The challenge was catching them in quantities that made the effort worthwhile. Termite mounds were like ancient fast food restaurants, if fast food restaurants were heavily fortified and full of creatures with powerful jaws. Early humans developed tools specifically for termite fishing, using specially prepared sticks to extract the insects from their nests. It was tedious, time-consuming work, but it provided reliable protein when larger sources weren't available. Water sources were both lifelines and death traps. Rivers and lakes provided not just water, but access to aquatic foods, shellfish, fish, aquatic plants, and the animals that came to drink. But these same water sources attracted every predator in the region. Crocodiles lurked beneath the surface. Big cats prowled the shores. Even something as simple as getting a drink required constant vigilance. Early humans learned to read water like a survival manual. Which sources were safe to drink from, which ones carried diseases, how to find water when the obvious sources had dried up. They discovered that following certain animal tracks would lead to hidden springs. They learned to dig in dry riverbeds to find water trapped underground. And when they did find water, they couldn't just drink their fill and move on. Water was often contaminated with parasites, bacteria, and other microscopic killers. Our ancestors developed strategies for making water safer to drink. Though they didn't understand the science behind what they were doing, they learned that water from certain sources was safer than others. They discovered that letting water sit in the sun for extended periods seemed to make it less likely to cause sickness. They figured out which plants could be added to water to improve its safety, though they had no concept of the antimicrobial properties they were utilizing. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of early human nutrition wasn't what they ate, but how they shared it. Food sharing among early humans was complex, strategic, and absolutely critical for survival. This wasn't just about being nice to your neighbors. It was about creating insurance networks that could mean the difference between life and death. When one member of the group found a large food source, they shared it, knowing that tomorrow they might be the one who came back empty-handed. When someone discovered a new food processing technique, they taught it to others, understanding that the survival of the group meant their own survival. This sharing extended to knowledge as well as food: which plants were safe to eat, which animals to avoid, where to find water during dry seasons, how to read weather patterns that could mean the difference between feast and famine. All of this information was passed down through demonstration, repetition, and sometimes harsh experience. The social dynamics around food were intricate. Who got to eat first? Who got the choice portions? How food was distributed during times of scarcity. These weren't arbitrary decisions. They were survival strategies that had been refined over generations, and the timing of eating was just as important as what was eaten. Early humans couldn't afford to be picky about when they ate. If food was available, you ate it, regardless of whether you were hungry, because you never knew when the next opportunity would come. This feast or famine existence shaped not just their daily routines, but their entire physiology. Their bodies became incredibly efficient at storing energy during times of abundance and conserving it during times of scarcity. They developed the ability to function on minimal calories for extended periods, then quickly recover when food became available again. The digestive systems of early humans were remarkably different from ours. They could extract nutrients from foods that would make modern humans violently ill. Their gut bacteria had adapted to process plant materials that we can't handle. Their stomachs could cope with partially spoiled meat that would hospitalize us. But the most extraordinary adaptation wasn't physical, it was cognitive. Early humans developed food intelligence that modern survival experts can barely comprehend. They became walking encyclopedias of nutritional knowledge, carrying in their heads detailed information about thousands of different food sources, their seasonal availability, processing requirements, and nutritional benefits. This knowledge wasn't written down anywhere. It couldn't be Googled or looked up in a manual. It had to be memorized, practiced, and passed down through generations of trial and error. One mistake in plant identification could kill you. One error in timing could mean starvation. The margin for error was essentially zero. They learned to read the landscape like a menu. The way certain trees dropped their leaves signaled when specific tubers would be ready for harvest. The behavior of particular birds indicated where protein-rich insects could be found. The color of distant hills revealed which water sources were most likely to be flowing, and this knowledge had to be updated constantly. Climate patterns changed. Animal migration routes shifted. Plant cycles varied from year to year. What worked in one location might be deadly in another. Early humans had to be flexible, adaptive, and incredibly observant. The seasonal rhythms governed everything about their eating patterns. During the wet season, plant foods were abundant, but often required extensive processing to be edible. Fruits were available, but competed for by every animal in the region. Fresh shoots and leaves provided essential nutrients, but came with their own risks. Dry seasons brought different challenges and opportunities. Many plants became inedible as they toughened and lost moisture, but this was also when certain seeds matured and became available. Animal behavior changed, creating new scavenging opportunities, but also new dangers as predators became more aggressive in their competition for scarce resources. The transition periods between seasons were often the most dangerous. Food sources that had been reliable would suddenly disappear. New options would become available, but determining which ones were safe required careful experimentation. This was when the accumulated knowledge of the group became most critical. Early humans developed what we might call a nutritional calendar, though it existed entirely in their collective memory. They knew which foods would be available when, how to prepare for lean periods, and how to maximize the nutritional value of seasonal abundance. But perhaps most remarkably, they learned to modify their environment to increase food availability. This wasn't farming in any sense we'd recognize, but it was the beginning of human manipulation of natural systems for nutritional benefit. They learned that burning certain areas would encourage the growth of edible plants. They discovered that moving specific seeds to new locations could create food sources closer to their regular habitats. They figured out that protecting certain trees or plants from other animals could ensure future food security. These early modifications required long-term thinking that challenges our assumptions about early human intelligence. They were making decisions that wouldn't pay off for months or even years. They were investing effort in activities that benefited not just themselves, but future generations. The tools they developed for food processing were marvels of simple engineering. Stone hammers designed specifically for cracking nuts. Digging sticks shaped and hardened for maximum efficiency in extracting tubers. Grinding stones that could reduce tough seeds to edible powder. But tools were just the beginning. Early humans developed techniques that transformed inedible materials into nutritious food. They learned to leach toxins from bitter plants by soaking them in specific types of water. They discovered that certain combinations of plants neutralized each other's harmful compounds while enhancing their nutritional benefits. They figured out fermentation processes that not only made food safer to eat, but actually increased their nutritional value. Without understanding the science, they learned that allowing certain plant materials to decompose in controlled ways created more digestible and nutritious food sources. The preservation techniques they developed were equally impressive. They learned to dry meat and plant foods in ways that prevented spoilage while maintaining nutritional content. They discovered that certain natural preservatives could extend the life of perishable foods. Smoking was mastered not just for preservation, but for flavor enhancement and parasite elimination. They learned which woods produced the best smoking conditions for different types of food. They figured out optimal smoking times and temperatures through generations of experimentation. Salt deposits, when they could be found, were treated like precious resources. Early humans understood that salt wasn't just a flavor enhancer, but a crucial nutritional component and preservation tool. They developed trade networks and territorial agreements around access to salt sources. The social structures that developed around food preparation and distribution were incredibly sophisticated. Different individuals specialized in different aspects of food procurement and processing. Some became expert plant gatherers, others skilled scavengers, still others masters of food processing techniques. This specialization wasn't rigid, but it allowed groups to maximize their collective efficiency. Knowledge and skills were shared freely because everyone understood that the group's survival depended on everyone's contribution. There was no concept of hoarding knowledge or keeping trade secrets. Children learned by watching and participating from the earliest possible age. There were no formal schools or structured lessons, but education was constant and comprehensive. A child's survival depended on mastering these skills. so learning was intense and practical. The games children played were actually survival training disguised as entertainment. Mock hunts, plant identification contests, food processing competitions. Play was preparation for the deadly serious business of staying alive. And the consequences of educational failure were immediate and harsh. A child who couldn't identify edible plants might starve. One who couldn't read animal behavior might become prey. The learning curve was steep, and there were no second chances. But within these harsh realities, early human communities developed remarkable resilience and adaptability. They created systems that could survive the loss of key individuals, the failure of major food sources, and environmental disasters that would challenge any modern survival group. Their backup plans had backup plans. Multiple food sources were always being cultivated or monitored. Alternative processing methods were maintained even when primary techniques were working well. Redundant knowledge systems ensured that critical information wouldn't disappear with the death of a single individual. The mental maps they carried of their territories were incredibly detailed. They knew not just where to find food, but when it would be available, how to process it, and what to do if primary sources failed. These mental databases covered hundreds of square miles and included thousands of pieces of interconnected information. And all of this knowledge had to be maintained without any form of written record. Memory techniques were developed that allowed individuals to retain vast amounts of complex information. Stories, songs, and rituals served as mnemonic devices that preserved critical survival knowledge across generations. The decision-making processes around food were lightning fast, but based on enormous amounts of accumulated data. Should they spend energy pursuing a potential food source? Was it worth the risk to approach that carcass? Could they afford to pass up those bitter tubers for something better? These decisions were made constantly, dozens of times each day, and each one could affect not just immediate survival but long-term health and group dynamics. The cognitive load was enormous, but early humans developed mental frameworks that allowed them to process complex information quickly and accurately. Risk assessment was built into every food-related decision. Early humans became expert at calculating odds, weighing potential benefits against possible costs, and making life or death choices with incomplete information. They had to be, because miscalculation meant death. The nutritional challenges our ancestors faced would humble any modern dietitian. They weren't just trying to get enough calories to survive the day. They were navigating a complex web of seasonal availability, toxic compounds, and nutrient deficiencies that could cripple or kill them if they made the wrong choices. Take vitamin C, for instance. Modern humans pop supplements or grab an orange without thinking twice. But 4.8 million years ago, scurvy was a constant threat. Our ancestors had to identify and consume specific plants that contained this essential nutrient, often plants that were bitter, tough, or only available during certain seasons. They learned that the inner bark of certain trees could prevent the bleeding gums and joint pain that signaled vitamin C deficiency, though they had no understanding of the biochemistry involved. Iron deficiency was another silent killer. Without access to readily available red meat, early humans had to get creative. They discovered that certain clay deposits could be consumed safely and provided essential minerals. They learned that cooking in primitive clay vessels actually added iron to their food. They figured out that combining certain plants increased iron absorption, creating nutritional partnerships that modern science has only recently begun to understand. Calcium presented its own challenges. No dairy farms, no fortified foods, no supplements. Early humans had to extract calcium from bones they scavenged, from specific types of rocks they learned to process, and from plants that concentrated this essential mineral. The knowledge of which plants provided bioavailable calcium and how to prepare them properly was literally a matter of life and death for growing children and pregnant women. But perhaps the most insidious nutritional challenge was dealing with anti-nutrients. Many of the plants available to early humans contained compounds that actively prevented the absorption of essential nutrients, tannins that bound to proteins, making them unavailable, oxalates that locked up calcium, phytic acid that blocked mineral absorption. Our ancestors became master food chemists out of necessity. They learned that soaking certain seeds in water for specific periods would reduce anti-nutrient levels. They discovered that grinding and fermenting plant materials could neutralize harmful compounds while enhancing beneficial ones. They figured out that combining certain foods could overcome the negative effects of anti-nutrients. The seasonal variations in food quality added another layer of complexity. A plant that was nutritious in spring might be toxic by late summer. Seeds that were safe when fresh could become dangerous after prolonged storage. Early humans had to maintain detailed mental calendars of not just when foods were available, but when they were at their nutritional peak and when they became hazardous. Water quality was an ongoing nutritional nightmare. Clean water wasn't just about avoiding immediate illness. Many water sources contained minerals that could accumulate in the body over time, causing chronic health problems. Others were deficient in essential minerals, leading to deficiency diseases. Early humans learned to recognize these differences and developed strategies for obtaining water that supported rather than undermined their health. They discovered that water from certain geological formations contained beneficial minerals. They learned that rainwater collected in specific ways was safer than surface water from streams or lakes. They figured out which natural containers could be used to store water without introducing harmful substances. The processing of water became as important as the processing of food. Early humans developed filtration techniques using sand, charcoal, and plant materials. They learned that boiling water in certain containers made it safer to drink, though they understood this in practical rather than theoretical terms. They discovered that adding specific plants to water could improve both its safety and its nutritional value. Pregnancy and child rearing brought their own nutritional crises. Pregnant women needed more calories, more protein, more of almost every nutrient, but their ability to gather food was often limited by their physical condition. The community's survival depended on ensuring that pregnant and nursing mothers received adequate nutrition, but resources were always scarce. Early human groups developed elaborate sharing systems specifically designed to support pregnant and nursing women. Certain foods were reserved for expectant mothers. Special processing techniques were used to make nutrient-dense foods more digestible for women dealing with pregnancy-related digestive issues. Knowledge about which plants could support healthy pregnancies and which ones were dangerous was guarded and passed down through generations of women. Children faced their own unique nutritional challenges. Their developing brains and bodies needed different nutrient ratios than adults, but they were often less capable of processing tough, fibrous foods. Early humans developed techniques for pre-processing foods, specifically for children, creating nutrient-dense porridges and pastes that could support rapid growth and development. Weaning was a particularly dangerous period. Children had to transition from breast milk to the adult diet gradually, but many of the available foods were too difficult for young digestive systems to handle. Early humans learned to create intermediate foods that bridged this gap, using fermentation, grinding, and cooking techniques to make adult foods accessible to children. The elderly presented another nutritional puzzle. Older individuals often had difficulty chewing tough foods, but their knowledge and experience made them valuable to the group's survival. Early human communities developed ways to ensure that elderly members could access adequate nutrition despite their physical limitations. Special food preparation techniques were used to make food soft enough for elderly teeth and gums. But the elderly weren't just recipients of special care. They were often the guardians of the most critical nutritional knowledge. They remembered which foods had been safe during previous famines, which processing techniques worked best in different conditions, and which combinations of foods provided optimal nutrition. The death of an elderly individual could represent the loss of irreplaceable survival information. The seasonal migrations that many early human groups undertook were largely driven by nutritional needs. As local food sources became depleted or seasonally unavailable, entire communities would move to areas where different foods were becoming accessible. These migrations required incredible planning and knowledge of vast geographical areas. Migration routes were chosen not just for safety, but for nutritional opportunity. Early humans learned to time their movements to coincide with peak availability of specific foods along their routes. They knew which water sources would be flowing at different times of year, which plants would be fruiting, and where the best scavenging opportunities were likely to occur. These migrations were incredibly risky. Moving through unfamiliar territory meant encountering new predators, new environmental challenges, and potentially hostile human groups. But staying in one place as food sources dwindled was often a death sentence. The decision of when to migrate and where to go required balancing immediate risks against long-term survival prospects. The physical demands of migration while maintaining adequate nutrition were enormous. Individuals had to carry enough food to sustain them during the journey. While remaining mobile enough to travel efficiently, they had to identify safe foods along unfamiliar routes while avoiding toxic plants they hadn't encountered before. Early humans developed portable, concentrated food sources specifically for migration. These proto-trail foods were nutritionally dense, lightweight, and resistant to spoilage. They learned to process and preserve foods in ways that maximized their portability while maintaining their nutritional value. Seeds, nuts, and dried plant materials formed the backbone of these travel rations. The social dynamics of food sharing during migration were complex and crucial. Resources were even more limited than usual, but the need for cooperation was greater. Early human groups had to maintain social cohesion while managing scarce resources and high stress levels. The ways they handled food distribution during these challenging periods often determined whether the group survived intact or fragmented. Competition for food resources with other human groups was an ever-present reality. Early humans weren't the only ones who knew where the best food sources were located. Multiple groups might converge on the same productive areas, leading to competition that could turn violent. The ability to assess whether a food source was worth fighting for was crucial for group survival. These competitive interactions weren't always hostile. Early human groups also developed trade relationships and resource-sharing agreements. They learned that cooperation with other groups could sometimes provide access to foods and knowledge that wouldn't otherwise be available. But these relationships were always fragile and could change quickly based on resource availability and group dynamics. The development of food-related technologies was driven by constant nutritional pressure. Every tool, every technique, every innovation had to prove its worth in terms of improved nutrition or more efficient food procurement. There was no room for technologies that didn't directly contribute to survival. Stone tool development was largely focused on food processing capabilities. Different stone types were selected and shaped for specific nutritional tasks. Cutting tools for processing meat and plant materials, grinding implements for breaking down tough seeds and tubers, digging tools optimized for extracting underground food sources. The sophistication of these food processing tools is often underestimated. Early humans developed specialized implements for dozens of different food preparation tasks. Each tool was designed to maximize nutritional extraction while minimizing energy expenditure. The knowledge required to create and maintain these tools was substantial and had to be passed down through generations. Fire technology was perhaps the most revolutionary nutritional innovation. Cooking didn't just make food safer and more digestible, it fundamentally changed the nutritional landscape available to early humans. Cooking broke down tough plant fibers, neutralized many toxic compounds, and made nutrients more bioavailable. But controlling fire was incredibly challenging with primitive technology. Early humans had to maintain fires continuously because starting new ones was difficult and uncertain. They had to gather and store enormous amounts of fuel. They had to protect fires from weather and predators while ensuring they didn't spread uncontrollably. The social organization required to maintain fire was substantial. Someone had to tend the fire constantly. Fuel had to be gathered and stockpiled. Cooking techniques had to be developed and refined. The benefits of fire were enormous, but so were the costs in terms of time, energy, and social coordination. Cooking also created new nutritional possibilities. Foods that were inedible raw became staples when cooked. Plant materials that were marginally nutritious became calorie-dense when processed with heat. Tough animal tissues became digestible sources of protein and fat. The techniques early humans developed for cooking were remarkably sophisticated given their limited tools. They learned to control temperature by managing fuel types and fire construction. They discovered that different cooking methods extracted different nutrients from the same foods. They figured out optimal cooking times that maximized nutrition while minimizing fuel consumption. Underground cooking methods were particularly ingenious. Early humans learned to dig pits, line them with stones, build fires to heat the stones, then use the retained heat to cook food slowly and efficiently. These earth ovens could cook large quantities of food using minimal fuel while freeing up group members for other activities. The nutritional advantages of cooked food were so significant that they likely drove major evolutionary changes. Cooked foods were easier to digest, requiring less energy for processing and allowing more calories to be directed toward brain development. The shift toward regular cooking may have been one of the key factors that enabled the remarkable expansion of human brain size. But cooking also created new nutritional challenges. Some nutrients were destroyed by heat. Others became less bioavailable when cooked. Early humans had to learn to balance the advantages of cooking against these nutritional costs, developing techniques that maximize benefits while minimizing losses. The social aspects of cooking transformed early human communities. Cooking required coordination and planning. It created central gathering points where knowledge could be shared, and social bonds strengthened. The need to tend fires and prepare cooked foods may have been one of the driving forces behind the development of more permanent settlements. Food sharing around cooking fires wasn't just about nutrition. It was about information exchange, social bonding, and cultural transmission. The stories told while food was being prepared and consumed carried critical survival knowledge from one generation to the next. Cooking fires became the universities of early human society. The development of food storage techniques was closely linked to cooking technologies. Cooked foods often lasted longer than raw ones, but they still required careful handling to prevent spoilage. Early humans learned to combine cooking with drying, smoking, and other preservation methods to create foods that could sustain them through lean periods. These preservation techniques required detailed knowledge of chemistry and biology. Though early humans understood them in practical rather than theoretical terms, they learned which combinations of heat, smoke, and drying produced the safest and most nutritious preserved foods. They figured out how to prevent harmful bacteria while encouraging beneficial fermentation processes. The seasonal timing of food preservation activities was crucial. Early humans had to coordinate intensive food processing periods with peak availability of preservation materials like salt, smoking woods, and drying conditions. These preservation seasons became major community efforts that required everyone's participation and cooperation. The complexity of these preservation efforts reveals just how sophisticated early human food systems had become. What started as desperate scavenging had evolved into carefully orchestrated community operations that could mean the difference between thriving and starving during the inevitable lean months. But here's where things get really interesting. Early humans weren't just preserving food randomly. They were creating what we might call the world's first strategic food reserves, carefully calculated stockpiles designed to carry communities through predictable periods of scarcity. They learned to read environmental cues that predicted harsh seasons months in advance. changes in animal behavior, shifts in plant growth patterns, atmospheric conditions that signaled incoming weather changes. These observations allowed them to time their preservation efforts for maximum effectiveness. The foods they chose to preserve weren't necessarily the ones they enjoyed eating most. They were selected based on nutritional density, storage stability, and shelf life. Early humans became expert at identifying which foods would provide the most nutritional bang for their preservation buck. Take the processing of animal fats, for instance. Fat was liquid energy, providing more than twice the calories of protein or carbohydrates. But animal fat spoiled quickly in warm climates and attracted scavengers that could compromise entire food stores. Early humans developed techniques for rendering fat into forms that could be stored safely for extended periods. They learned to combine rendered fats with dried meat and processed plant materials to create what were essentially the world's first energy bars. These concentrated food sources could sustain individuals for days during travel or provide emergency nutrition when other food sources failed. The nutritional intelligence required to create these early preserved foods is staggering. Without understanding concepts like macronutrients or calories, early humans intuitively learned to combine foods in ways that provided complete nutrition. They discovered which plant and animal combinations supplied all essential amino acids. They figured out which foods provided the vitamins and minerals needed to prevent deficiency diseases. But perhaps most remarkably, they learned to preserve not just individual foods, but entire nutritional profiles. Their preserved food combinations weren't random assortments of whatever was available. They were carefully balanced nutritional packages designed to sustain human health over extended periods. The fermentation techniques they developed were particularly sophisticated. Without understanding the microbiology involved, early humans learned to create controlled fermentation environments that enhanced food safety and nutritional value. They discovered that certain fermented plant materials could provide nutrients that weren't available from fresh sources. Fermented foods also served as what we might call probiotic supplements. Though early humans had no concept of gut bacteria or digestive health, they simply observed that people who regularly consumed certain fermented foods seemed to have fewer digestive problems and better overall health. The containers used for fermentation and food storage were marvels of primitive engineering. Early humans learned to create vessels from animal skins, plant materials, and even hollowed stones that could maintain optimal conditions for food preservation. These containers had to be waterproof, resistant to pests, and capable of maintaining stable internal environments. Different container types were developed for different preservation methods. Some were designed to allow air circulation for drying processes. Others were sealed to create anaerobic environments for fermentation. The knowledge required to construct and maintain these storage systems was substantial and required constant innovation and refinement. The location of food storage sites was just as important as the storage methods themselves. Early humans had to find places that were accessible to their group, but hidden from competitors and scavengers. They needed locations with stable temperatures and humidity levels. They required sites that could be defended if necessary, but abandoned quickly if circumstances changed. Some groups developed elaborate caching systems, spreading their preserved foods across multiple hidden locations. This strategy reduced the risk of losing entire food reserves to theft, natural disasters, or discovery by competing groups. But it also required remarkable memory and organizational skills to keep track of multiple storage sites across vast territories. The seasonal rotation of these food caches created complex logistical challenges. Early humans had to monitor their stored foods regularly, consuming items before they spoiled, while ensuring that enough remained for future needs. They had to balance current consumption against future security, making decisions that could affect their survival months later. Quality control for stored foods required expertise that modern food safety inspectors would respect. Early humans learned to identify the early signs of spoilage in preserved foods. They developed techniques for salvaging partially spoiled foods and determining when stored items had become too dangerous to consume. The social rules governing access to preserved foods were intricate and essential for group survival. Who could access stored foods during times of abundance versus scarcity? How were preserved foods distributed among group members? What happened when individuals contributed different amounts to the preservation effort? These food storage social systems had to balance individual contributions with group needs, short-term desires with long-term survival, and fair distribution with practical necessity. The groups that developed effective food storage social systems had significant survival advantages over those that didn't. Conflict resolution around food storage was particularly important. When preserved foods were discovered to be spoiled, or when storage sites were raided by competitors, groups had to have mechanisms for dealing with the loss without fragmenting. The ability to maintain social cohesion during food crises often determined whether communities survived intact. The knowledge systems required to maintain effective food preservation were enormous and had to be transmitted across generations with perfect accuracy. Mistakes in preservation techniques could kill people. Errors in storage location selection could result in the loss of entire food reserves. The educational systems early humans developed around food preservation were intensive and comprehensive. Children began learning preservation techniques as soon as they were old enough to participate safely. They started with simple tasks like gathering materials and gradually progressed to more complex responsibilities. By adulthood, every individual was expected to master multiple preservation methods and understand the principles behind them. The gender dynamics around food preservation varied among different early human groups, but generally involved specialized knowledge systems that were closely guarded and carefully transmitted. Some preservation techniques were associated with specific roles within the community, while others were considered essential knowledge for all adults. The seasonal nature of preservation work created intense periods of community cooperation. During peak preservation seasons, normal daily routines were often suspended so that everyone could contribute to the massive effort required to process and store foods for the months ahead. These preservation seasons were simultaneously times of abundance and anxiety, as the success of preservation efforts would determine survival during lean periods. The tools required for food preservation were often different from those used for daily food procurement and processing. Specialized cutting implements for meat processing, containers designed specifically for fermentation, drying racks constructed to optimize air circulation. These preservation tools represented significant investments of time and resources. Maintaining and replacing preservation tools required forward planning and resource allocation. Early humans had to ensure that they had adequate tools available when preservation seasons arrived. They had to balance the resources devoted to tool creation and maintenance against other survival needs. The innovation pressure around food preservation was constant. Groups that developed more effective preservation methods had significant survival advantages. This drove continuous experimentation and refinement of techniques. Early humans were constantly testing new approaches, modifying existing methods, and adapting techniques to changing environmental conditions. The geographic variations in available preservation materials and methods created distinct regional food cultures. Groups in different environments developed preservation techniques optimized for their specific conditions and available resources. These regional variations in food preservation may have been among the earliest expressions of human cultural diversity. Trade and information exchange around preservation techniques created some of the first intergroup cooperation networks. Groups would share preservation knowledge, trade specialized preservation materials, and sometimes coordinate preservation efforts. These early trade relationships often centered around food-related technologies and knowledge. The environmental impact of large-scale food preservation activities was significant. The fuel requirements for smoking and drying operations were enormous. The plant materials needed for containers and processing required careful resource management. Early human groups had to balance their preservation needs against environmental sustainability. Some preservation techniques required modifications to the physical environment: smoking structures, underground storage pits, drying platforms. These modifications represented some of the earliest examples of humans actively shaping their environment to support their nutritional needs, rather than simply adapting to existing conditions. The timing coordination required for effective community preservation efforts was remarkable. Multiple preservation processes had to be synchronized to make optimal use of available labor and resources. Different foods required preservation at different times, creating complex scheduling challenges that required community-wide cooperation. Weather prediction became crucial for preservation planning. Early humans learned to read environmental signs that indicated optimal conditions for different preservation methods. They had to time their preservation activities to take advantage of favorable weather, while having backup plans for when conditions weren't ideal. The quality assessment of preserved foods required expertise that developed over lifetimes of experience. Early humans learned to evaluate preserved foods using multiple senses, looking for subtle indicators of quality and safety. They developed standardized methods for testing preserved foods before consumption. The psychological aspects of food preservation were significant. Having adequate food stores provided security and reduced anxiety about future survival. But the responsibility for maintaining these stores created its own stress. The knowledge that group survival depended on successful preservation efforts added pressure to already demanding seasonal work periods. The celebration and ritual aspects of successful preservation efforts helped maintain community morale and reinforce the importance of these activities. Early human groups often developed ceremonies and social events around preservation seasons, creating positive associations with the intensive work required. As preservation techniques became more sophisticated and reliable, they enabled early human groups to support larger populations and maintain more stable settlements. The ability to store food effectively reduced the need for constant movement in search of new resources. This stability created opportunities for further technological and social development. The preservation knowledge systems that early humans developed were among their most valuable cultural assets. Groups guarded this knowledge carefully, while also recognizing the need to share it within their communities. The balance between secrecy and sharing around preservation techniques was delicate and crucial for survival. The seasonal rhythms of preservation work created natural teaching opportunities. The annual cycle of preservation activities provided regular opportunities for knowledge transmission and skill development. These seasonal patterns helped ensure that critical preservation knowledge was reinforced and maintained across generations. The innovation cycles around preservation techniques were driven by both success and failure. Groups learned as much from preservation failures as from successes. Failed preservation attempts provided valuable information about what didn't work, helping refine techniques and improve future outcomes. The resource allocation decisions around preservation were complex and consequential. How much time and energy should be devoted to preservation versus other survival activities? Which foods were worth the effort required to preserve them effectively? These decisions required weighing immediate needs against future security. The social status associated with preservation expertise created incentives for individuals to develop and maintain these crucial skills. Those who excelled at preservation techniques often held important positions within their communities. This social recognition helped ensure that preservation knowledge was valued and maintained. The adaptation of preservation techniques to changing environmental conditions required constant monitoring and adjustment. Climate changes, resource availability shifts, and new environmental challenges all required modifications to established preservation methods. The flexibility to adapt preservation techniques was crucial for long-term survival. The integration of preservation activities with other survival strategies created complex systems that had to be coordinated carefully. Preservation work had to fit within the broader patterns of food procurement, tool making, shelter construction, and social activities. The ability to coordinate these multiple systems effectively was a mark of successful early human communities. The sophistication of early human food preservation systems enabled something even more remarkable than survival through lean seasons. It created the foundation for what we might recognize as the world's first culinary traditions. These weren't recipes in any modern sense, but carefully developed flavor combinations that served crucial nutritional and social functions. Early humans discovered that certain food combinations weren't just more nutritious than their individual components, they actually tasted better. The fermented plant pastes they created for preservation often developed complex flavors that made otherwise bitter or unpalatable foods more appealing. This wasn't accidental. Groups that could make their food taste better had significant advantages in maintaining morale during difficult periods. The development of these early flavor systems reveals incredible sophistication in understanding how taste affected both nutrition and psychology. Early humans learned that adding certain aromatic plants to preserved foods could mask the flavors of spoilage while adding beneficial compounds. They discovered that specific combinations of salty, bitter, and sweet plant materials could create flavors that encouraged consumption of nutritionally dense but otherwise unappealing foods. But perhaps most importantly, they learned that shared meals with appealing flavors strengthened social bonds in ways that simple calorie consumption couldn't match. The groups that developed more sophisticated food preparation techniques weren't just better nourished physically. They were more cohesive socially, and this cohesion translated directly into survival advantages. The seasonal variations in available flavoring materials created natural variety in early human diets. Spring brought fresh shoots and young leaves that added bright green flavors to preserved foods. Summer provided aromatic seeds and flowers that could be dried and stored for use throughout the year. Fall offered nuts and fruits that added sweetness and richness to otherwise monotonous preserved foods. Winter was when the true art of early human food preparation showed itself. With fresh ingredients scarce, early humans had to rely entirely on their preserved foods and flavoring materials. The communities that had developed the most sophisticated preservation and flavoring techniques could maintain varied, appealing diets even during the harshest months. The tools required for advanced food preparation were marvels of prehistoric engineering. Grinding stones designed to create specific textures in plant materials. Heating stones that could be used to control cooking temperatures precisely. Stirring implements carved to optimize mixing of different ingredients. These tools weren't just functional. Many showed signs of decoration and personal customization, suggesting that food preparation had already begun to take on cultural and artistic dimensions. The individuals who excelled at food preparation were beginning to develop distinct styles and techniques that reflected both practical expertise and creative expression. The knowledge required to use these tools effectively was substantial and had to be learned through years of practice. Understanding which stones produced the best grinding textures for different materials. Knowing how to heat cooking stones to optimal temperatures without cracking them. Learning to judge cooking times by observing subtle changes in food appearance and aroma. The social dynamics around advanced food preparation were complex and varied among different early human groups. Some communities developed specialist roles for individuals who showed particular aptitude for food preparation. Others maintained systems where everyone was expected to master basic techniques, while a few individuals developed advanced skills. The teaching methods for advanced food preparation techniques were sophisticated and multisensory. Students learned by watching, touching, smelling, and tasting. They developed the ability to judge food quality and cooking progress using multiple senses simultaneously. This multisensory education created deep, intuitive understanding that couldn't be replicated through verbal instruction alone. The innovation pressure around food preparation was constant and intense. Groups were continuously experimenting with new combinations of ingredients, new preparation techniques, and new cooking methods. The consequences of successful innovation were significant improvements in nutrition, flavor, and social satisfaction. But innovation in food preparation was also risky. New techniques could result in spoiled food, wasted resources, or even poisoning. Early humans had to balance the potential benefits of innovation against the risks of failure. This required sophisticated risk assessment skills and careful experimental protocols. The seasonal timing of food preparation innovations was crucial. New techniques were typically tested during periods of abundance when failure wouldn't threaten survival. Successful innovations were then incorporated into regular preparation routines and passed down to future generations. The environmental factors that influenced food preparation were numerous and constantly changing. Humidity levels affected drying and fermentation processes. Temperature variations influenced cooking times and methods. Seasonal availability of fuel materials determined which preparation techniques were practical at different times of year. Early human groups had to develop flexible preparation systems that could adapt to changing environmental conditions. They needed backup techniques for when primary methods weren't feasible. They required alternative ingredient sources when preferred materials weren't available. The water requirements for advanced food preparation were substantial and had to be carefully managed. Many preparation techniques required specific types of water with particular mineral contents or purity levels. Early humans learned to identify and access water sources that were optimal for different preparation needs. The fuel management required for sophisticated cooking was complex and resource-intensive. Different cooking techniques required different types of fuel with varying burn characteristics. Some preparation methods needed long, slow cooking with consistent low heat. Others required intense, brief heating with rapidly burning materials. Early humans developed elaborate fuel gathering and storage systems to support their food preparation activities. They learned to identify and harvest the best fuel materials for different cooking needs. They created storage systems that kept fuel dry and readily accessible while protecting it from theft and deterioration. The coordination required for complex food preparation involved entire communities during peak preparation seasons. Large-scale cooking operations required multiple individuals working in carefully orchestrated sequences. Some people gathered fuel while others prepared ingredients. Some managed cooking fires while others monitored food quality. These community preparation events became important social occasions that strengthened group bonds while accomplishing essential survival work. They provided opportunities for knowledge sharing, skill development, and cultural transmission. The stories told and songs sung during food preparation became vehicles for passing down crucial survival information. The leadership structures that emerged around food preparation were often different from those that governed other community activities. The individuals who excelled at food preparation didn't necessarily hold general leadership positions, but they exercised significant influence during preparation seasons. The quality control systems for food preparation were rigorous and essential for community safety. Early humans developed standardized methods for testing food quality at every stage of preparation. They learned to identify the subtle signs that indicated when preparation processes were proceeding correctly or going wrong. The waste management associated with food preparation required careful planning and execution. Food preparation generated significant amounts of organic waste that had to be disposed of safely. Improper waste handling could attract predators, contaminate water sources, or create sanitation problems. Early human groups developed sophisticated waste management systems that turned food preparation byproducts into useful materials. Bones were processed into tools and containers. Organic waste was managed to avoid attracting dangerous scavengers. Some waste products were processed into materials useful for other survival activities. The storage requirements for prepared foods were different from those needed for raw materials. Prepared foods often had different spoilage patterns and storage needs than raw ingredients. Early humans had to develop specialized storage techniques for their prepared foods. The transportation of prepared foods presented unique challenges during seasonal migrations. Prepared foods were often more fragile than raw materials and required special handling during travel. Early human groups had to balance the nutritional advantages of prepared foods against the practical difficulties of transporting them. The trade value of advanced food preparation skills created some of the earliest forms of specialization and exchange among human groups. Communities with superior food preparation techniques could trade prepared foods for raw materials or other resources. These early trade relationships helped spread food preparation innovations across different groups. The cultural significance of food preparation began to emerge as these techniques became more sophisticated. Different groups developed distinctive preparation styles that became markers of group identity. The foods a group prepared and how they prepared them became part of their cultural signature. The seasonal ceremonies that developed around food preparation activities served multiple functions beyond simple celebration. They reinforced the importance of food preparation work, provided structured opportunities for skill transmission, and created positive associations with the intensive labor required. The gender dynamics around advanced food preparation were complex and varied significantly among different early human groups. Some communities developed gender-specific preparation roles, while others maintained systems where individuals of all genders participated in all aspects of food preparation. The age-related aspects of food preparation knowledge created natural mentorship systems within early human communities. Older individuals who had mastered advanced techniques took responsibility for training younger community members. These mentorship relationships were crucial for maintaining and improving food preparation capabilities across generations. The health implications of advanced food preparation techniques were significant and generally positive. Better food preparation improved nutrition, reduced the risk of foodborne illness, and created more appealing diets that encouraged adequate food consumption. Communities with superior food preparation skills generally enjoyed better health outcomes. The psychological benefits of advanced food preparation were substantial but often overlooked. Having access to varied, flavorful foods improved morale and reduced the psychological stress associated with survival in harsh environments. The social aspects of shared meal preparation and consumption strengthened community bonds and individual mental health. The technological innovations that emerged from food preparation needs often found applications in other survival activities. Tools developed for food processing were adapted for other uses. Techniques learned for managing cooking fires were applied to other heating needs. The problem-solving skills developed through food preparation innovation were transferable to other challenges. The environmental modifications required for advanced food preparation represented some of the earliest examples of humans actively shaping their surroundings to meet their needs. Cooking areas were modified to optimize workflow and safety. Storage areas were constructed to protect prepared foods. Processing areas were designed to facilitate complex preparation activities. The coordination between food preparation activities and other survival needs required sophisticated planning and resource allocation. Food preparation had to be balanced against hunting, gathering, tool making, and shelter construction. The communities that managed these competing demands most effectively had significant survival advantages. The seasonal variations in food preparation activities created natural rhythms that structured early human community life. Different times of year brought different preparation challenges and opportunities. These seasonal patterns became deeply embedded in early human cultural and social systems. The innovation cycles around food preparation were driven by both practical needs and creative expression. Improvements in preparation techniques were motivated by survival requirements, but also by the satisfaction that came from creating more appealing and varied foods. This combination of practical and aesthetic motivation drove rapid innovation in food preparation capabilities. The resource investment required for advanced food preparation was substantial, but generally provided excellent returns. The time, energy, and materials devoted to developing sophisticated preparation techniques were repaid through improved nutrition, better health outcomes, and stronger social cohesion. The knowledge preservation systems that developed around food preparation were crucial for maintaining these capabilities across generations. Complex preparation techniques couldn't be learned quickly or easily. They required systematic instruction and years of practice to master. The communities that developed effective systems for preserving and transmitting food preparation knowledge had significant long-term advantages. The adaptation mechanisms built into early human food preparation systems allowed communities to adjust their techniques as environmental conditions changed. Preparation methods could be modified when ingredient availability shifted. Techniques could be adapted when fuel sources changed. This flexibility was crucial for long-term survival in variable environments. The quality assessment capabilities that early humans developed for prepared foods were remarkably sophisticated. They learned to evaluate food quality using multiple criteria, including appearance, aroma, texture, and taste. These assessment skills were crucial for maintaining food safety and nutritional quality. The social protocols that governed food preparation activities helped maintain order and efficiency during complex community cooking operations. Rules about who could participate in different preparation activities, how tasks were allocated, and how disputes were resolved were essential for successful large-scale food preparation efforts. The integration of food preparation activities with spiritual and cultural practices began to emerge as these techniques became more sophisticated. Certain preparation activities took on ritual significance. Specific foods became associated with particular ceremonies or social events. The preparation process itself began to carry cultural meaning beyond its practical function. The long-term consequences of these early innovations in food preparation extended far beyond immediate survival benefits. The development of sophisticated food preparation techniques laid the groundwork for all subsequent human culinary traditions. The social structures that emerged around food preparation became models for other forms of specialized community work. As we trace the evolution from desperate scavenging to sophisticated food preparation, we see the emergence of capabilities that would define human civilization. The ability to transform raw materials into nutritious, appealing foods through knowledge, skill, and cooperation became one of the defining characteristics of human communities. These early human food preparation innovations reveal cognitive and social capabilities that challenge simple assumptions about prehistoric intelligence and organization. The complexity of the knowledge systems, the sophistication of the techniques, and the effectiveness of the social coordination required for advanced food preparation demonstrate remarkable human adaptability and creativity. The legacy of these early food preparation innovations lives on in every modern kitchen, every cultural food tradition, and every shared meal that strengthens human bonds. When we cook dinner or share food with others, we're participating in practices that trace their origins back to those early humans who first learned to transform survival into sustenance, necessity into nourishment, and individual hunger into community strength. The mastery of food preparation marked just the beginning of a transformation that would reshape not only what early humans ate, but how they thought about food itself. As communities developed more sophisticated techniques for processing and preserving their sustenance, something remarkable began to emerge: the concept of abundance. For the first time in human history, groups weren't just surviving meal to meal, they were creating surpluses. And with surplus came choices that had never existed before. Which foods to eat immediately, which to preserve, which to trade, and which to save for special occasions. These decisions required a level of strategic thinking that pushed early human cognition into entirely new territories. The psychology of having stored food was profound. Imagine the relief of knowing that tomorrow's meal was already secured. That kind of food security allowed early humans to redirect mental energy away from constant foraging and toward other activities. Tool innovation accelerated. Social structures became more complex. Art began to emerge, but abundance also created new problems. Stored food attracted not just scavengers, but other human groups who might prefer raiding to gathering. The communities that had worked hardest to create food surpluses suddenly found themselves targets for those who hadn't developed the same preservation capabilities. This led to the development of the first food-based conflicts in human history. Not the desperate resource competition that occurred during famines, but strategic warfare aimed at capturing stored food supplies. Early human groups had to learn to defend their food stores while maintaining the cooperative relationships necessary for continued food production. The defensive strategies that emerged around food protection were ingenious and varied. Some groups developed elaborate camouflage systems for their storage sites, making them nearly impossible to locate without insider knowledge. Others created decoy storage areas filled with less valuable foods, keeping their primary reserves hidden elsewhere. The most successful groups learned to distribute their stored foods across multiple locations, creating redundant supply networks that couldn't be completely compromised by a single raid or discovery. These distributed storage systems required remarkable organizational skills and memory capabilities, as group members had to track dozens of hidden caches across vast territories. But defense wasn't just about hiding food. Early human communities began developing the first military strategies specifically designed around food protection. Guard rotations were established to monitor storage areas. Alarm systems using sound or smoke signals were created to warn of approaching threats. Rapid response teams were organized to defend against raids. The social implications of food defense were enormous. Groups had to decide who would be responsible for protecting stored foods, how long individuals would be assigned to guard duty, and what would happen to guards who failed in their responsibilities. These decisions created some of the first formal military structures in human society. The psychological pressure of defending food stores was intense. Guards had to remain alert for hours at a time, often in isolation, knowing that their vigilance could mean the difference between community survival and starvation. The mental strain of this responsibility was enormous, and early human groups had to develop support systems for their food defenders. Women played crucial roles in food defense that are often overlooked in traditional narratives about early human warfare. While men might serve as primary guards, women often managed the complex logistics of distributed storage systems. They maintained detailed mental maps of cache locations, monitored food quality across multiple sites, and coordinated the movement of supplies to avoid detection. Children were integrated into food defense systems from an early age, though their roles were carefully designed to avoid exposing them to direct danger. They served as messengers, carrying information between guard posts and storage sites. They helped maintain camouflage around storage areas, ensuring that caches remained hidden from potential raiders. The development of early warning systems around food storage areas drove innovation in communication technologies. Groups learned to use animal calls, smoke signals, and reflected sunlight to send messages across long distances. These communication systems had to be sophisticated enough to convey complex information while remaining undetectable to potential enemies. The seasonal variations in food defense requirements created additional challenges. During harvest seasons, when large quantities of food were being processed and stored, security needs were highest, but available personnel were often committed to food preparation activities. Groups had to carefully balance their labor allocation between production and protection. Winter months brought different defense challenges. Stored foods became more valuable as fresh sources disappeared, making storage sites more attractive targets for raiders. But the harsh weather also made both raiding and defending more difficult, creating complex strategic calculations about when attacks were most likely and defenses most needed. The negotiation and diplomacy that emerged around food resources created some of the first formal agreements between human groups. Treaties governing access to seasonal food sources, agreements about territorial boundaries around storage areas, and protocols for resolving disputes over food resources. These early diplomatic efforts laid the groundwork for more complex intergroup relationships. Trade relationships often developed as alternatives to raiding. Groups that excelled at producing particular types of foods could exchange their surpluses for different foods produced by other communities. These trading relationships reduced the incentive for raids while providing access to dietary variety that single groups couldn't achieve alone. The establishment of neutral meeting grounds for food trading was a major innovation in early human diplomacy. These locations, often near water sources or other natural landmarks, became the first markets where different groups could exchange foods and other resources safely. The protocols governing behavior at these trading sites were complex and strictly enforced. The development of standardized measures for food trading required mathematical thinking that pushed early human cognitive capabilities. Groups had to develop ways to compare the value of different foods, account for seasonal variations in availability, and create fair exchange rates that all parties would accept. The quality assessment of traded foods became a specialized skill that some individuals developed to expert levels. These early food inspectors learned to evaluate the safety, nutritional value, and storage life of foods offered in trade. Their expertise was crucial for preventing communities from accepting foods that might cause illness or spoil quickly. The social status associated with successful food trading created new forms of leadership within early human communities. Individuals who excelled at negotiating favorable trades, identifying valuable foods, or establishing relationships with other groups often gained influence and respect within their own communities. The transportation challenges associated with food trading drove innovation in carrying technologies. Groups developed specialized containers for transporting different types of foods safely across long distances. They learnt to package foods in ways that prevented spoilage during multi-day trading expeditions. The seasonal timing of trading expeditions required careful coordination and planning. Groups had to balance the benefits of trading certain foods against the risks of transporting them during particular seasons. Weather conditions, predator activity, and the availability of other trading partners all influenced trading schedules. The cultural exchange that occurred during food trading had impacts far beyond simple resource acquisition. Groups learned about different food preparation techniques, discovered new food sources in other territories, and acquired knowledge about seasonal patterns in distant areas. These information exchanges were often more valuable than the physical foods being traded. The language development that occurred around food trading created some of the first standardized vocabularies for intergroup communication. Terms for different foods, quantities, quality levels, and trading protocols had to be understood across different communities. These trading languages became the foundation for more complex intergroup communication. The record-keeping systems that emerged around food trading were among the earliest forms of human information storage beyond simple memory. Groups developed ways to track trading debts, seasonal exchange patterns, and the reliability of different trading partners. These proto-accounting systems required abstract thinking and symbolic representation. The dispute resolution mechanisms that developed around food trading created some of the first formal justice systems in human society. Procedures for handling disagreements about food quality, quantity discrepancies, and trading protocol violations had to be established and accepted by all participating groups. The enforcement mechanisms for trading agreements required cooperation between groups that might otherwise be competitors or enemies. The benefits of maintaining stable trading relationships had to outweigh the temptations to cheat or raid trading partners. This created complex systems of mutual deterrence and cooperation. The insurance concepts that emerged around food trading were remarkably sophisticated. Groups learned to diversify their trading relationships to avoid dependence on single partners. They developed backup trading arrangements for times when primary partners weren't available. They created mutual aid agreements to help trading partners recover from disasters. The seasonal festivals that developed around major trading gatherings became important cultural events that strengthened intergroup relationships. These gatherings provided opportunities for social bonding, knowledge sharing, and cultural exchange that went far beyond simple resource trading. The marriage and alliance relationships that often developed through trading contacts created complex networks of kinship and obligation across different groups. These relationships provided additional security for trading arrangements while creating new forms of social organization that transcended individual community boundaries. The technological innovations that were shared through trading relationships accelerated development across all participating groups. Food processing techniques, tool-making methods, and survival strategies spread rapidly through trading networks, benefiting entire regions rather than just individual communities. The geographic knowledge that accumulated through trading expeditions expanded early human understanding of their world dramatically. Traders learned about distant territories, seasonal patterns in different regions, and the locations of valuable resources. This geographic intelligence was crucial for long-term survival and expansion planning. The risk assessment capabilities that developed around trading decisions required sophisticated evaluation of multiple variables. Traders had to consider seasonal timing, weather risks, the reliability of trading partners, the value of different foods, and the security of transportation routes. These complex risk calculations pushed early human decision-making capabilities to new levels. The specialization that emerged within trading communities created new forms of social organization. Some individuals became expert negotiators, others specialized in food quality assessment, still others focused on transportation and logistics. This specialization increased overall trading efficiency while creating new social roles and hierarchies. The communication technologies that developed to support long-distance trading relationships drove innovation in messaging systems. Groups learned to send messages across vast distances using relay systems, coded signals, and specialized messengers. These communication networks became the foundation for more complex information-sharing systems. The weather prediction capabilities that trading groups developed were crucial for successful expeditions. Traders learned to read atmospheric conditions, seasonal patterns, and environmental signs that predicted weather changes. This meteorological knowledge was essential for timing trading trips and avoiding dangerous conditions. The navigation techniques that emerged from trading expeditions pushed early human spatial reasoning to new levels. Traders had to find their way across unfamiliar territories, locate specific meeting points, and return home safely. They developed sophisticated wayfinding methods using celestial observations, landmark recognition, and environmental cues. The security protocols that trading groups established protected both goods and people during dangerous expeditions. These protocols covered everything from how to approach unfamiliar groups safely to procedures for defending against attacks during travel. The development of these security systems required careful analysis of risks and coordinated group responses. The leadership structures that emerged within trading expeditions were often different from those that governed home communities. Trading required specific skills and knowledge that didn't necessarily correlate with general leadership abilities. This created flexible leadership systems that could adapt to different situations and challenges. The cultural preservation efforts that developed around trading relationships helped maintain group identities while participating in intergroup activities. Communities had to balance the benefits of cultural exchange with the need to maintain their own distinct traditions and practices. These balance efforts created sophisticated cultural adaptation strategies. The economic concepts that emerged from complex trading relationships laid the groundwork for all subsequent human economic systems. Ideas about value, exchange rates, debt, credit, and economic cooperation all had their origins in these early food trading networks. The intellectual frameworks developed for managing trading relationships became the foundation for more complex economic thinking. The population dynamics that were influenced by successful trading relationships allowed some early human communities to support larger groups than would otherwise have been possible. Access to diverse food sources through trading reduced the risk of local resource depletion, while providing nutritional variety that supported population growth. The territorial concepts that developed around trading relationships created some of the first formal agreements about land use and resource access between human groups. These territorial agreements had to balance the need for exclusive access to certain resources with the benefits of cooperative relationships and resource sharing. The conflict resolution mechanisms that emerged from trading disputes created precedents for handling disagreements between groups without resorting to violence. These early diplomatic solutions preserved valuable trading relationships while establishing principles for fair treatment and mutual respect. The information networks that developed through trading contacts created early human intelligence systems that provided crucial survival information. News about environmental changes, predator movements, resource availability, and other group activities spread rapidly through trading networks, helping all participants make better survival decisions. The technological diffusion that occurred through trading relationships accelerated innovation across entire regions. New tools, techniques, and technologies spread rapidly through trading networks, ensuring that beneficial innovations weren't restricted to their communities of origin. This technological sharing created faster development rates and improved survival outcomes for all participating groups. The cultural synthesis that emerged from extensive trading relationships created new forms of human expression that combined elements from multiple communities. Art, music, storytelling, and ritual practices began to incorporate influences from different groups, creating richer and more complex cultural traditions. The educational systems that developed to support trading activities created new forms of knowledge transmission and skill development. Young people had to learn not just their own group's traditions, but also the customs, languages, and expectations of trading partners. This multicultural education created more sophisticated and adaptable individuals. The social mobility that became possible through trading success created new opportunities for individuals to improve their status within their communities. Successful traders could gain influence, resources, and respect that might not have been available through other activities. This social mobility created incentives for developing trading skills and knowledge. The risk management strategies that evolved around trading activities created some of the first systematic approaches to managing uncertainty and danger. Trading groups learned to diversify their risks, create backup plans, and develop contingency strategies for dealing with various types of problems and challenges. As trading relationships became more sophisticated and reliable, they began to transform the fundamental nature of early human survival strategies. Communities were no longer isolated groups struggling independently against environmental challenges. They were becoming parts of larger networks that could share resources, knowledge, and support across vast territories. This network effect created resilience that individual communities could never achieve alone. When one group faced local disasters or resource shortages, they could draw support from their trading partners. When environmental conditions favored certain regions, the benefits could be shared across the entire network through trading relationships. The psychological impact of belonging to these larger networks was profound. Early humans began to think of themselves not just as members of small, isolated communities, but as parts of larger social and economic systems. This expanded identity created new forms of cooperation and mutual responsibility that transcended traditional group boundaries. The planning horizons that became possible through reliable trading relationships extended far beyond immediate survival needs. Communities could make long-term investments in food production, storage, and processing, knowing that they had access to trading networks that could help them weather short-term difficulties and take advantage of seasonal opportunities. The specialization that became economically viable through trading relationships allowed communities to focus their efforts on activities where they had natural advantages, while trading for resources they couldn't produce efficiently themselves. This economic specialization created dramatic improvements in overall productivity and quality of life. The innovation incentives that trading relationships created drove rapid development in food production, processing, and storage technologies. Communities that could produce better, more valuable, or more durable foods had significant advantages in trading relationships. This competitive pressure created continuous innovation and improvement. The quality standards that emerged from competitive trading relationships pushed food production capabilities to new levels. Trading communities had to maintain consistent quality in their food products to preserve their reputations and trading relationships. These quality pressures created systematic approaches to food production and quality control. The seasonal coordination that became possible through trading networks allowed communities to take advantage of timing differences across different territories. Foods that were abundant in one region during certain seasons could be traded to areas where they were scarce, creating more efficient resource utilization across entire regions. The information sharing that occurred through trading relationships created early warning systems for environmental challenges. Communities could learn about approaching weather patterns, resource shortages, or other problems from their trading partners, allowing them to prepare for challenges before they arrived in their own territories. The technological collaboration that developed through trading relationships accelerated innovation rates dramatically. Communities could combine their knowledge and resources to tackle challenges that would have been impossible for individual groups to solve alone. This collaborative innovation created solutions that benefited entire trading networks. The cultural evolution that occurred through trading interactions created new forms of human expression and organization that synthesized elements from multiple communities. These cultural innovations often proved more effective and resilient than the traditions of individual groups, creating evolutionary advantages for communities that participated in extensive trading networks. The social complexity that emerged from managing multiple trading relationships created new forms of leadership and organization within communities. Individuals had to develop diplomatic skills, negotiation abilities, and cultural sensitivity that went far beyond traditional survival skills. These new capabilities created more sophisticated and adaptable human communities. The economic thinking that developed from managing complex trading relationships laid the intellectual foundation for all subsequent human economic systems. Concepts of value, exchange, investment, and economic growth all had their origins in these early trading networks. The mental frameworks developed for managing trading relationships became the basis for increasingly sophisticated economic reasoning. The geographic knowledge that accumulated through extensive trading relationships expanded early human understanding of their world exponentially. Trading networks created detailed knowledge of vast territories, seasonal patterns across different regions, and the distribution of resources and opportunities across entire continents. The communication systems that evolved to support long-distance trading relationships became the foundation for more complex information networks. The languages, symbols, and protocols developed for trading communication provided the basis for increasingly sophisticated information sharing and cultural transmission systems. The transportation technologies that were developed to support trading expeditions created capabilities that extended far beyond simple resource exchange. These transportation innovations enabled exploration, migration, and cultural diffusion that reshaped human settlement patterns across entire continents. The security cooperation that became necessary for protecting trading routes and relationships created some of the first multi-community military alliances. These security partnerships provided collective defense capabilities that individual communities could never achieve alone, while establishing principles of mutual aid and cooperative defense. The conflict resolution mechanisms that were refined through managing trading disputes created diplomatic traditions and legal principles that became the foundation for more complex systems of intergroup justice and cooperation. These early diplomatic innovations established precedents for peaceful resolution of conflicts that continue to influence human society today. The legacy of these early trading innovations extended into every aspect of human development, but perhaps nowhere was their impact more profound than in the realm of human migration patterns. As trading networks expanded and became more reliable, they created pathways for information and resources that would fundamentally reshape how early humans thought about movement across the landscape. Before extensive trading relationships developed, migration was largely reactive. Groups moved when local resources became scarce, when environmental conditions became unbearable, or when conflicts made staying dangerous. But trading networks created something entirely new: predictive migration. Communities could now learn about opportunities in distant territories months or even years before they needed to act on that information. This advanced knowledge transformed migration from a desperate survival strategy into a calculated economic decision. Groups could plan movements to coincide with seasonal abundance in distant areas. They could coordinate migrations with trading partners to ensure access to resources along travel routes. They could even arrange for trading partners to establish temporary supply caches to support long-distance movements. The planning sophistication required for these coordinated migrations was extraordinary. Multiple communities had to synchronize their activities across vast distances and extended time periods. Communication systems had to carry complex logistical information across territories where direct contact was impossible. Backup plans had to account for weather delays, resource shortages, and changes in political relationships between groups. But perhaps most remarkably, these coordinated migrations created the first human transportation corridors. Regular movement along certain routes created established pathways that were maintained and improved over time. Dangerous river crossings were marked and sometimes improved with basic engineering. Reliable water sources along migration routes were protected and maintained through cooperative agreements between multiple groups. These transportation corridors became highways for more than just human movement. Information, technologies, cultural practices, and genetic diversity all flowed along these established routes. The corridors created accelerated evolution in human capabilities, as innovations and adaptations spread rapidly across vast distances and diverse populations. The maintenance of these transportation networks required unprecedented cooperation between groups that might otherwise have little contact with each other. Communities along migration routes had to agree to provide safe passage, maintain water sources, and respect the neutrality of these shared pathways. These agreements created some of the first international treaties in human history. The seasonal rhythms of migration along these corridors created predictable patterns of cultural exchange and economic activity. Certain locations became regular meeting points where multiple groups would converge during migration seasons. These convergence points evolved into the first trade fairs, where dozens of communities might gather simultaneously for intensive periods of exchange and interaction. The social dynamics at these seasonal gatherings were complex and carefully regulated. With so many different groups in close proximity, the potential for conflict was enormous. But the benefits of peaceful interaction were equally significant. These gatherings developed elaborate protocols for managing intergroup relationships, resolving disputes, and maintaining order among potentially hostile communities. The cultural synthesis that occurred at these seasonal gatherings created new forms of human expression that combined elements from dozens of different communities. Art forms, musical traditions, storytelling techniques, and ritual practices were shared, modified, and recombined in ways that created entirely new cultural innovations. The marriage negotiations that took place at these gatherings created genetic exchange networks that prevented inbreeding while establishing kinship relationships across vast territories. These marriage alliances created additional layers of cooperation and mutual obligation that strengthened the entire network of trading and migration relationships. The competitive displays that occurred at these gatherings drove innovation in food production, toolmaking, and artistic expression. Communities competed to demonstrate their prosperity, technological sophistication, and cultural achievements. This competition created incentives for continuous improvement and innovation that benefited entire regions. The information markets that developed at these gatherings created systematic approaches to knowledge sharing and acquisition. Communities could trade not just physical resources, but information about distant territories, new technologies, environmental changes, and other forms of valuable intelligence. The dispute resolution mechanisms that were refined at these large gatherings created sophisticated systems of intergroup justice that could handle conflicts involving multiple communities with different traditions and expectations. These early legal systems established principles of fairness, evidence evaluation, and conflict resolution that became models for more complex justice systems. The seasonal timing of these gatherings had to be coordinated across multiple climate zones and migration patterns. The logistics of ensuring that dozens of communities could converge at specific locations during optimal seasons required remarkable planning and communication capabilities. The security arrangements for these large gatherings were complex and necessarily involved cooperation between potential enemies. Temporary alliances had to be established to maintain order and protect participants. These security arrangements often became the foundation for longer-term military cooperation and mutual defense agreements. The trade standardization that emerged from these large gatherings created some of the first universal measures and quality standards. With so many different communities participating in exchanges, common standards for weights, measures, and quality assessments had to be established and maintained. The language development that occurred at these multilingual gatherings created trade languages and communication protocols that could be understood across multiple communities. These lingua francas became essential tools for intergroup communication and cultural exchange. The technological demonstrations that took place at these gatherings accelerated innovation diffusion dramatically. New tools, techniques, and technologies could be shared with dozens of communities simultaneously, creating rapid adoption of beneficial innovations across entire regions. The food preparation competitions that developed at these gatherings drove culinary innovation and created new standards for food quality and presentation. Communities competed to demonstrate their food preparation skills, leading to rapid improvements in cooking techniques and food aesthetics. The storytelling traditions that emerged from these gatherings created new forms of historical record-keeping and cultural transmission. Stories that incorporated elements from multiple communities became vehicles for preserving and sharing important information across vast networks of human settlements. The religious and spiritual practices that developed at these gatherings often synthesized beliefs and rituals from multiple communities, creating new forms of spiritual expression that could unite diverse groups around common practices and beliefs. The artistic collaborations that occurred at these gatherings created new forms of creative expression that required cooperation between artists from different communities. These collaborative works often became symbols of intergroup cooperation and shared identity. The athletic competitions that developed at these gatherings created opportunities for peaceful competition between communities while demonstrating physical capabilities and training techniques. These competitions often became important social events that strengthened relationships between groups. The educational exchanges that occurred at these gatherings created systematic approaches to knowledge transfer between communities. Young people could learn from experts from multiple communities, acquiring skills and knowledge that wouldn't have been available within their home groups. The resource pooling that became possible at these large gatherings allowed communities to undertake projects that would have been impossible for individual groups. Large-scale infrastructure improvements, major hunting expeditions, and complex technological innovations could be accomplished through temporary cooperation between multiple communities. The weather prediction collaborations that developed at these gatherings combined meteorological knowledge from multiple regions to create more accurate and comprehensive weather forecasting capabilities. This shared weather intelligence helped all participating communities make better decisions about migration timing, food storage, and seasonal planning. The medical knowledge sharing that occurred at these gatherings created the first systematic approaches to healthcare information exchange. Healing techniques, medicinal plant knowledge, and treatment protocols were shared between communities, creating more effective healthcare capabilities across entire regions. The population management discussions that took place at these gatherings helped communities coordinate their growth and expansion plans to avoid resource conflicts while maximizing regional carrying capacity. These early demographic planning efforts prevented overuse of resources while supporting sustainable population growth. The environmental monitoring that became possible through these networks created early warning systems for climate changes, resource depletion, and environmental disasters. Information from across entire regions could be combined to identify environmental trends and predict future challenges. The innovation funding that became possible through these networks allowed communities to pool resources to support experimental technologies and techniques. These early research and development cooperatives accelerated innovation rates while distributing both costs and benefits across multiple communities. The quality assurance systems that developed through these networks created standardized approaches to evaluating and maintaining the reliability of shared resources and services. These quality control mechanisms ensured that network participants could depend on each other for crucial support and resources. The succession planning that became necessary for maintaining these complex networks created new approaches to leadership development and knowledge preservation. The skills required to manage inter-community relationships had to be systematically developed and transmitted to ensure network continuity across generations. The crisis response capabilities that emerged from these networks created collective disaster response systems that could mobilize resources from across entire regions to help communities recover from local disasters. These mutual aid networks provided resilience that individual communities could never achieve alone. The long-term planning that became possible through these stable networks allowed communities to make investments and commitments that extended far beyond immediate survival needs. Infrastructure projects, territorial agreements, and technological development efforts could be planned and executed over periods of years or even decades. The cultural preservation efforts that became necessary as communities participated in extensive intergroup networks created systematic approaches to maintaining distinct group identities while participating in larger cooperative systems. These cultural balance mechanisms allowed communities to gain the benefits of network participation without losing their unique characteristics and traditions. The economic diversification that became possible through these networks reduced the risks associated with dependence on local resources while creating new opportunities for prosperity and growth. Communities could specialize in activities where they had advantages while accessing diverse resources through network relationships. The political sophistication that developed through managing these complex networks created new forms of governance and decision-making that could coordinate activities across multiple autonomous communities. These early federal systems established principles of shared authority and cooperative decision-making that became models for more complex political organizations. The educational systems that evolved to prepare individuals for participation in these networks created new approaches to learning that emphasized cross-cultural competence, diplomatic skills, and economic reasoning. These educational innovations produced more sophisticated and capable individuals who could navigate complex intergroup relationships effectively. The technological collaboration that became routine through these networks created systematic approaches to innovation development that combined knowledge and resources from multiple communities. These collaborative innovation systems produced more effective solutions while distributing development costs and benefits across network participants. The information management systems that became necessary for maintaining these complex networks created early approaches to data storage, retrieval, and analysis that allowed communities to make better decisions based on comprehensive information from across their entire network regions. As these networks matured and became more sophisticated, they began to create something entirely unprecedented in human history: the possibility of surplus beyond mere survival. For the first time, human communities could produce more than they immediately needed while having reliable systems for storing, trading, and sharing that surplus across vast networks of cooperative relationships. This emergence of systematic surplus creation marked a fundamental transition in human development. Communities were no longer merely surviving in harsh environments. They were beginning to thrive, to create wealth, and to invest in improvements that would benefit future generations. The psychological impact of this transition cannot be overstated. The planning horizons that became possible with reliable surplus creation extended far beyond seasonal cycles into multi-year and even multi-generational timeframes. Communities could undertake projects that wouldn't provide benefits for years, knowing that their network relationships would sustain them through the investment period. The specialization that became economically viable through surplus creation allowed individuals and communities to focus their efforts on activities where they could create the most value while relying on network relationships to provide resources they couldn't produce efficiently themselves. The innovation incentives that surplus creation provided drove rapid development in all areas of human activity. Communities that could create valuable surpluses had advantages in network relationships, creating competitive pressures that accelerated technological and social development. The social complexity that emerged from managing systematic surplus creation required new forms of organization, leadership, and decision-making that could coordinate complex economic activities while maintaining social cohesion and fairness. The cultural elaboration that became possible when basic survival was secured through network relationships allowed human communities to invest time and resources in art, music, storytelling, and other forms of cultural expression that enriched human experience beyond mere survival. The population growth that became sustainable through reliable surplus creation and network support allowed human communities to grow larger and more diverse, while maintaining the cooperation necessary for continued prosperity and development. The territorial expansion that became possible through network-supported surplus creation allowed human communities to settle in new areas and environments, spreading human presence across vast territories while maintaining the connections necessary for continued cooperation and mutual support. The environmental modification that became feasible through coordinated surplus creation allowed human communities to begin actively shaping their environments to better support their needs and objectives, marking the beginning of humanity's transition from environmental adaptation to environmental management. The technological acceleration that resulted from surplus-supported innovation created rapid improvements in all aspects of human capability, from food production and processing to transportation, communication, and tool-making. The social evolution that occurred through network-supported surplus creation established the foundations for all subsequent human social development, creating principles of cooperation, specialization, and mutual aid that continue to shape human society today. As you sit there tonight, probably scrolling through your phone, maybe snacking on something from your pantry, take a moment to truly appreciate what you've just experienced. We've traveled back 4.8 million years together, walked in the footsteps of our ancestors who faced challenges that would break most of us before we even had our morning coffee. These weren't just primitive humans scraping by in the dirt. They were master strategists, brilliant problem solvers, and innovative engineers who developed technologies and social systems so sophisticated that they literally shaped our evolution. Every bite of food you take, every shared meal with family or friends. Every grocery store trip traces its origins back to those early humans who transformed desperation into abundance through knowledge, cooperation, and sheer determination. The next time you complain about your dinner options or waste food without thinking, remember those ancestors who could identify thousands of edible plants by memory alone, who risked their lives approaching predator kills for scraps of meat, who developed preservation techniques that could sustain entire communities through months of scarcity. Their legacy lives in your DNA, in your brain's capacity for complex reasoning, in your ability to cooperate with strangers, and in every technological innovation that makes your life possible today. They didn't just survive impossible odds. They created the foundation for everything we call human civilization. So before you go to sleep tonight in your safe, warm bed, maybe say a quiet thank you to those remarkable ancestors who fought, innovated, and cooperated their way through the ultimate survival challenge so that you wouldn't have to. Their story is your story. Their triumph is the reason you're here. Thanks for taking this incredible journey back in time with me. If this changed how you think about food, survival, or human capability, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Until next time, never forget just how extraordinary the path that led to your existence really was. Extraordinary the path that led to your existence really was.